Italk 2016, June 8th. Italk 2016, June 8th.
Doing well for helping me out there. And you didn't have a record last time. I think the meeting went to almost 12 o'clock, and oh boy.
No, but if you take the duration divided by number of agenda items, I think it still might have been one.
Approval of meeting minutes. You all want to gander it and get a motion to approve?
I did read them, and I move approval.
No, second.
I did want to mention, Ariana, we did have the date on the meeting attendance for April 13th. On the last page, page 5, it says April 13th, May 11th.
Yeah, so we'll work with Tessa to repost that, to make sure that's stated
The
accurately.
last page here, it shows the typo there.
Fred, can I just comment? I just want to apologize to all my fellow members of the committee for my absence and repeated absence, but I've taken on an assignment that takes me 1 week a month to Washington, and invariably that week is coinciding with this meeting. I went last week, so fortunately I was able to attend, but I apologize, but if that continues, I was going to have to remove myself. I don't know how long this assignment's going to last, but if the calendar continues to coincide, I'm not going to be able to do my role here, so my apologies for missing.
Please be advised that we've been severely handicapped by your absence.
I mean, I am handicapped.
But it has given us the opportunity to volunteer you for some committees.
That's exactly right.
I noticed that, and I accepted that.
Yes.
Well, any more discussion on, you had a motion, a second? All those in favor of, raise your right hand or left hand? Any opposition, abstentions? Passes. Public comments? Or member comments? Any comments from the members? I did want to mention though that next month would be, if it's hard to believe, the last meeting and I'll be chair. And there's a process to pick the next chair.
That's assuming you're not reelected.
I don't know if that's happened before, and I think it's gone every once a year for everybody, but if there's an interest, express that to Ariana, or just next month we'll have a vote, or nominating to vote. So if you're interested in chair and vice chair, that'd be great. Consent item. Sarah, for the management grant program, there you are. Does the group want to get a report from Sarah on this item?
You don't know anything?
On the mitigation program? Questions? Any questions? No?
As long as Dustin.
That looks good.
There are two of them eyeing you right behind you. We have a vote on that at all?
No, that's information.
Reports, Oriana.
Yes, so I have your usual summary of Transportation Committee and Board of Directors actions on transit-related agenda items. Since your May meeting, the Transportation Committee approved RTIP Amendment number 12, which was an admin modification to reprogram funds based on the revised 2016 STIP fund estimate. The Transportation Committee also recommended board approval of the Midcoast Construction Services Agreement, and an update of this item is on your agenda for today's meeting. There were no significant comments on either of those. And based on comments from your last meeting, you wanted to hear back regarding an article in the newspaper regarding the Coastal Rail Trail Chesterfield to G bike project. The Transportation Committee approved directing Sandag staff to hold further design and environmental work for the project pending an agreement with the City of Encinitas. And that's for the development of the new alignment along the western side of Highway 101. And then they also directed staff to report back to the Transportation Committee within 30 days, and that's scheduled to occur later this month. So at your next meeting, we can report back on further status, if that's okay with you. Sandag staff did convey your concerns to the Transportation Committee, just so you're aware as well. And then in terms of the board's actions since your last meeting, they unanimously approved the final fiscal year 2017 program budget, which also included the draft early action program budget, which was presented at your last meeting. They also unanimously approved the Transportation Committee's recommendation to move forward with the construction contract for the Midcoast project, which is also on your meeting today as an information item. And then finally, the board reviewed additional modifications to the draft ordinance and ballot language for the proposed funding measure. The next steps are to present another revised draft to the board this Friday. And then a first reading of the ordinance is scheduled for June 24th with a second reading, including adoption of the ordinance by the board, scheduled for July 8th, after which all the documentation would be submitted to the county register of voters for inclusion in the November ballot. So that's the update. Yes.
Just for clarification, so you said that they did not agree on final language. There's going to be further revision, which for the ordinance. Sorry.
For the ordinance, there's been a number of changes. It seems like every time that it goes to the board, there's some additional changes, and Jose has all the details.
Right, and so essentially it's following the schedule that we laid out for them about a month ago or so, where we would do, we will come back to the board with any revisions to reflect feedback. And so the plan right now is to take it once again to the board at this Friday's meeting. The first reading of the ordinance would occur on June 24th, and then the second reading of the ordinance would occur July 8th. So, I mean, this is just, and each time that we brought it back, it's been fewer and fewer revisions.
Great. Thanks. Great, thank you very much.
Does it still anticipate in the current way it's written that the one Italk would oversee the current and the future transit?
Yes.
If it was to be adopted?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Ryan. We do have a action item here to accept the 2015 Transnet Fiscal and Compliance Audit. Lisa's here, and I believe Trisha Foster
yes.
is here. I was had a chance to report to was it Transportation Committee, Ariana, when we did the report with Mark and you?
That's correct, April 1st, Transportation Committee.
And that was for the draft.
That was for the draft.
And we presented that to the, Mark did a great job presenting to the Transportation Committee, and now you're here back for the final approval of it?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go back even further. Usually at this point, I try to go through the whole cycle just so that you can kind of remember how this all works. So a year ago, in June, the subcommittee was chosen to review the agreed upon procedures and also be a part of kind of the first half of the audit phase. Sorry, I have to read here. And that subcommittee was Brad, Stewart, Kai, and Tracy is always part of that subcommittee. And then in July, the agreed upon procedures were presented and were accepted by the Italk. The auditors then performed their field work. There's a deadline of December 1st for the RTCIP data to be provided to the auditors, and that was met by all of the local jurisdictions. That's the one that we monitor very closely, because if that is not met, then all of the subsequent year funding, Transnet funding, is given to everybody else. That jurisdiction will not receive it, and at this point, there really is no way around that, the way the ordinance is written. So we do, the auditors and SANDAG, we keep on top of that date.
Is that a one-year penalty, or is it for the remainder?
It's a one-year penalty, right. So when you think about the county or the city of San Diego, that's a significant dollar value, yeah. And then, so the audit cycle continues then in March. The draft audits were presented. Then we started a little bit earlier. May, we chose next year's subcommittee. And now we're back, bringing the final draft report to you to close out the whole cycle. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Trisha.
Hi, so I'm Trisha Foster. My role in the engagement was the manager. So as Lisa kind of went through the timeline, I'm just going to briefly talk about the action items. In March, we did present the draft reports to the Italk. After that, we presented to the Transportation Committee, which Brad had just mentioned. That was on April 1st, and the board approved the drafts on April 22nd, 2016. Since that point, there's only been 2 significant changes to the draft reports. It has to do with 2 agencies or transit operators. It was NCTD and MTS. They both did not meet their operator eligibility requirements, specifically for rail. So they had requested to exclude some costs, uncontrollable costs that skewed the CPI, increase in CPI. Subsequently, the board did approve the exclusion of the costs, and so that's where the draft reports have basically changed, and now they are in compliance with the CPI. MTS requested to exclude uncontrollable electricity costs, and NCTD requested to exclude guaranteed annual contract escalations for their coaster and their sprinter contracts. There's been a couple other just cleanup items with the other draft reports, but nothing very significant. Just some footnote changes where a jurisdiction had to go and submit an RTIP amendment and such, and so they've all been in compliance with that. No other significant changes to the report. That's about all I have. Are there any questions?
I have one question on page, I think it's 12, it's exhibit, the schedule A. It just jumped out of me.
MTS or?
I'm sorry?
MTS.
Oh.
It's just the first line item there, because it's the first line item, it jumps out at you, it's a negative number.
I'm sorry.
Are you, the funds received?
The funds received?
Yeah, funds received was a negative number, I was just curious what that implies. It's obviously the same number that's been expended, and then we spent money and it was a negative number received, I was curious.
Yeah, that's a swap of funding sources, so it's a negative revenue and a negative expenditure. And the reason we ask that, we report it that way so that the cumulative data for Transnet will be correct. So we want to back that activity out in the current year.
You just broke the code. I didn't appreciate that the expenditure was a negative, a reverse number 2 that offset that one. I'm sorry.
Why did the one, I forget which one you said, when you're talking about changes, wanted to exclude the costs? You said, mentioned something about they wanted to exclude their
Uncontrollable costs.
Yeah.
Unanticipated uncontrollable costs for, I guess one was electricity and the other was contract escalation costs. That was due to when they did the contract, they had the contracts many years back and they didn't anticipate the Great Recession. So there was all these, contract escalations year over year, which now that the CPI was negative this year, it really affected their rail operations. So they are going back and renegotiating those contracts in the coming year.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
That's great. They did a good job explaining NCTD and MTS, and they both explained exactly what the problems were on the escalation and all that. So I thought it was good.
Yeah, we usually discuss with them ahead of time to be prepared for questions, and we do ask that somebody attend each of the meetings, since they obviously are the experts. Yeah, definitely. So we do have a recommendation today for you. The Italk is asked to accept final fiscal year 2015 Transnet fiscal compliance audit reports as prepared by the independent certified public accounting firm of Davis Barr LLC in accordance with the agreed upon procedures, so the final audit reports may be issued.
Does that go back to the board then, one more time?
No, you.
Yeah, that was it. Okay,
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Any comments, or can I get a motion to that effect, to accept the report?
I'll move.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Good report. All those in favor, raise your right hand or left. All those opposed? Abstentions? Great.
All right. Thank you very much.
So Mark, thank you. Annual report, Mariana.
So item 6 on your agenda today is the Italk annual report for 2016. And you may recall that we provided a draft of your annual report at your May meeting. Attachment 1 includes a draft of the revised report. We've incorporated the changes to address the comments that you had at your last meeting on pages 4 and 8 of the report, where we show the local street and road balances chart as well as the maintenance of effort chart. For the local streets and roads chart on page 4, one of the questions that members had was why unused funds shown in the column to the far right, appear to have increased from fiscal year 2014 to fiscal year 2015. And the answer is that the data in those two columns comes from two different sources. For the 2016 annual report, which is your current year report, it is the balance of the first 2 years in the FY 15-16 biennial RTIP, whereas last year's report, the 2015, the data comes from just the second year of the FY 13-14 biennial RTIP. So we really can't compare those two columns. They represent data from two different time frames within two different RTIPs. And what we've done to clarify that is expand on the last footnote at the bottom to explain that these remaining biennial programmed amounts unused at June 30th, 2015 are available to the cities to request through June 30th, 2016. And then we also added at the top lead-in paragraph on that same page the last sentence in order to call out the cities that have presented status reports on their spend down of Transnet funds to you during the course of the year, to clarify that per your request. And then on page 8, we have the maintenance of effort chart. And for that one, we basically simplified the chart per your request. So there used to be a lot of non-applicable, so we kind of simplified that per your request. So today we're asking the Italk to approve the 2016 annual report. You'll recall that Chair Barnum was scheduled to present your annual report at the June 24th board meeting. However, a number of agenda items that were originally scheduled for that board meeting are being proposed to be moved to the July 22nd board meeting, including this item, in order to make time for the first reading of the ordinance for the proposed ballot measure, and which is scheduled for that meeting as well, as you know. So if there are additional changes that you would like to make, we can definitely incorporate those. We can either bring back a revised version for your July meeting, or you can approve it and we can make, you know, any minor changes. And then
I had a comment on knowing whether the ink is dry or not, but on page 5, when the reader looks at this and they see in the second to the right-hand column.
Are you looking at the local agency street and road balances chart?
Page 4, is it?
Page 4 of the report, page 5 of the attachment. I know.
Page 5.
Okay.
Where you have about 3 or 4 of them that are over 100%.
Yes.
That jumps out at a reader, and I'm not certain how adequately, that's obviously where they have financed. And there's a note down below that seems to just talk about interest or something.
Yep.
Which to a knowledgeable person would imply there's financing, but should there be a note that explains why someone can spend 300% of what they were given?
Yes. So we do talk about, you know, the amounts exceeding 100% may show estimated percentage spent in excess of available funds that may be due to debt proceeds dispersed and or programming based on 2 years of allocations. It's footnote 3.
Yeah, I think it's almost a grammatical thing because there's a reference to and bond and commercial paper proceeds, but the way it's ordered, it almost looks as if it's, you might misinterpret it to mean the interest on the bond and commercial paper proceeds as opposed to the actual proceeds.
Okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
So between
I'm not certain whether I fully
footnote
internalized
two.
that if I read it.
The interest
because
earned
it
on
tends
and
to address
spent.
the subject matter.
I guess I would say that I would guess that the bond and commercial paper proceeds would be greater amounts than the interest.
Okay.
Am I interpreting this correctly? That
It says may show it. In fact, it definitely does show the fact that there were borrowed funds
Okay.
to be repaid from disbursements later.
We could, so take out the word may.
I just think about whether
Or,
someone who doesn't have your knowledge would understand why you can spend more money than.
then you have, yeah.
Hey, if you don't get it, I don't
I
think
know,
that.
I know what the
You're-
answer was,
yeah,
but I didn't
that's
think it was explained. I can't remember.
Well, that's
that.
what I mean, something like
Sorry,
that.
then I have a different question.
Okay.
Which was, my interpretation was that the amounts may include the actual borrowed proceeds, not just the interest on
Yes.
the borrowed
Yes.
proceeds.
Yes, that's the issue.
And if that's correct, I think maybe switching it around
Right.
would clarify.
Right. Got it.
It's the borrowed proceeds which drives those numbers. The
Right.
interest is an incidental.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, can I step in here? I think what may work was exactly what you just said here is, includes, bond and commercial proceeds, used in advance of future Transnet, revenue, and may include interest earned. And that way,
Yeah, that's
we're
much more
calling
clear.
out, right, and that way, we're gonna touch
It may
upon
include
everything.
interest is
Yeah,
not
right,
terribly
right,
important.
yeah.
It's a
Well,
technicality.
that piece, it might, some of them do, some of them don't, right, but the proceed piece,
That's the main
and
thing why
that's
I
the main
got, I
piece, so we'll
spent
put
more
that
than
first, right?
10 days.
And also put a little, information of why, in advance of the
And the
future
fact that
transit.
that extra borrowing will be repaid out of subsequent years' revenues received.
Okay, yeah,
So in
definitely,
the end of the day, it can't be more than 100%.
correct.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
On the same idea, Lisa, I noticed looking on page 5 that you show the little footnote 2 with several of those cities that have exceeded the, and I'm wondering why you don't also show foothold 3, footnote 3. I mean,
Yeah.
you could say 2, 3.
Okay. And maybe also at the top of that, Italk monitoring column where we show
Yes.
footnote 3, maybe
Something
add
like
2.
that. In other words, point out,
Yeah, right.
and if you can do it for footnote 2, you can do it for
Right.
footnote 3.
Yeah, and I think also, speaking to that, it's easier to see the footnote reference with the local agency than it is in the heading
Yeah,
for that column. The 3 is,
Agreed.
it's due to the coloring, it is rather difficult to see, so that's a great idea.
I would argue the most important fact to get across to a reader is that, I don't know how you'd say this, but ultimately you can't spend more than 100%. I don't want one city saying, geez, I'm
Yeah.
getting screwed. This other city's got 300%, I'm at 80%. What's wrong with this picture? They've chosen to time it and they ultimately can't have any more than their allocation than anybody else.
Yeah, last time, we did talk about this notion, I think that relating to what Jonathan brought up, to give more visibility to the cities which had spent less than the 75%, which I think the narrative does. And I think the concept of perhaps putting the footnotes next to the cities might also do that. I'm wondering if there might also be room, perhaps in that same spirit, in that Italk monitoring header, to have some reference to the notion that the target equals 75% or something like that, which would just very succinctly highlight.
Sure. Okay.
And if the graphic artists think that doesn't work, then, that's okay. Because I think, in fact, we do clarify the presentation. It's just, as Dick mentions, when you see lots of numbers on a page, you want to just try to make it as simple as possible for people to understand.
I have another one.
Yes.
On page 8, in terms of being simple, and it might become way too busy. But
Page
this-
8, which
Page
is
8.
the,
70/30.
okay, the allocation, okay? I've looked
My
this-
mind immediately wants to see what the percentages are. And in order to do that, I have to do them in math, which I don't do. Like, for example, I want to know whether my city is spending the full 30% for maintenance or not.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering whether you could drop alongside the number in parentheses, the percentage.
Okay.
Helpful, or whether it makes it too busy, I don't know.
Yeah, this is actually just the allocation. It's not the spending. So this is gonna be the annual revenue received
I
for
mean, this is
fiscal year.
just a 70/30 split, I didn't touch on that.
Right, it is a 70-30 split.
Why, you didn't catch that either.
Yeah.
Well, what's that?
Yeah,
tell
that's
me?
the requirement is.
What's that tell me?
Well, what's that tell us?
They're meeting
Well,
the
it's a requirement
requirements.
that Sandag apply the correct amount of revenue to the congestion relief and the maintenance pot, if you will, for each of the local jurisdictions. So it is a procedure that the auditors,
But we didn't apply that, we allowed them the individual cities to apply it at their discretion up to those limits.
The spending of it, correct, but as the revenues come in, we actually do allocate.
I didn't, as I
70,
said, I didn't do
30,
the
right.
math, I didn't.
Yeah.
That doesn't provide the oversight. How much did the city of San Diego spend? 20%, 25%?
Yeah, the narrative does say that the audits found that Sandag appropriately allocated. No, you're right, sorry. Yep, that's right, it doesn't talk about the actual.
I would think a reader would be interested in, well, how much did my city spend each of those two things? That was a discretionary exercise within the limits you constrained them with.
I thought that this showed actual amounts spent in those two categories. When I looked at it, because this doesn't, all this proves is that we know how to multiply.
Successfully.
70% and 30%, yes.
My question is, and you guys probably noticed, how many of the cities actually spend 30% on maintenance as opposed to using that for the roads program?
Okay, so in the, I'm not sure if we have a chart for that, from this audit. That was an additional procedure that was added, in the individual audits where the auditors look at the funds held by the local jurisdiction and the spending there, and then those held by Sandag, because there are bank fees and other overall program costs, so there are expenditures on our side as well. And so the audits combine that data to show that this is the amount that they've spent, and to ensure that none of them have exceeded the 30% threshold for maintenance. So none of them are at 30%, but there are a few that are very close to 30%.
Is that usually the smaller agencies?
I'm not quite sure the sizing. I've never looked at it that way, but we could definitely gather that information and provide it in an easy to read format.
My question is to our committee, do you think this is something that would be interesting or not?
Probably not.
What's the actual number?
Well, I would like, I mean, because I'm a resident of the city of San Diego and I think they're not doing a very good job on maintenance, I sure as a taxpayer would like to know, okay, they could spend X number of dollars on maintenance. What did they spend on maintenance?
That was my interest.
Well, you could-
I am
Yeah,
also
that's
a citizen
exactly.
That's
Well,
exactly
yes.
where my mind was.
You just add one column here on
There's
the.
a complaint that we don't have the money to do this and this.
Exactly.
That's why the roads are, and have they spent all of this, or have they chosen to spend it
Somewhere
on
else.
congestion relief?
Yeah, exactly.
And remember too, this, when you're looking at that split, you have to look at it from a cumulative
Cumulative, right,
standpoint
yeah,
up to this
right.
point, not just in the year that
That's
is, you know,
just
under
fine.
audit. And there are other pieces than just the extension revenue, right? So we've earned interest over time. Also, for those Transnet One projects that were complete, that had balances remaining, then if they didn't have another old Transnet One project to use those funds, then that got moved over to the extension. And, you know, from the Sandag standpoint, we automatically say 70-30, but they can do 70%, or they can do 100% for congestion relief. So if we try to do the math and go back and say, well, here are the total revenues received thus far in the extension, the spending on the extension projects is going to be much greater because of these other factors. Yes.
Okay, my follow-up question is, has Transnet One monies been closed out with the local agencies, or do some people still have balances?
Yeah, for the majority, they have been closed out, and that, in fact, is Jose's department that reached out to all the jurisdictions this past year, I believe, informing them that, you know, close this out, and if you're not, what is your plan? So there are a few that still have some money, and not just the local street and road, there's still some little bike money out there, but the projects are still ongoing. So as long as they're ongoing, we are monitoring it. It is part of the reports that you see. What it doesn't do is the old Transnet One, as long as those projects are active and the funds are there, that is not part of our Schedule B, which is the Transnet Extension Cumulative. So it will never roll in there unless there's funds left over that then come over to the extension.
in order to simplify future, first of all, this is already done, I don't know that we should change it. But for the future reports, I don't see why we even need that page 8, the allocation. We could, a simple statement saying that we properly allocated 70% and 30%
Jonathan, I would just, I fully agree with you. The ink is dry, we ought not try to fool with this, but in the future, I would think the most important issue on this subject is what my government officials are choosing to, how they're allocating between the 70 and 30. I
It's
appreciate
the cumulative to this point with the spending.
I appreciate the difficulties of trying to get a number, but you
Yeah.
might figure out, is there a way to
We do,
somehow?
it's actually in the audit.
Yeah,
We
it's
can
an
just
audit
take it from the
procedure.
audit. We have the procedure, it's just now just putting it into table
So-
format.
Well,
It's an audit procedures to make sure that
Verify.
they have not cumulatively spent over the 30.
Yes.
So the accountants have to do the work to calculate a number,
Yes.
so it should exist.
Of course, you're saying that they could be spending over 30% if they use carryover funds.
Well, and that's one of the reasons for this tool, this additional procedure that was added,
Yeah.
is to take a look at that, because we're so many years in now, and we're to the point where there's been this interest accumulated. For those agencies that have not been spending their maintenance funds on a regular basis, more congestion relief, and maybe not much more than 75%, then the revenue is just sitting there in the maintenance, pot, earning interest. And now, if that interest is just applied to that maintenance dollar, then that's gonna skew the numbers. And that also is part of the review that we're doing this year, is looking at how interest is being applied. Are we splitting it 70-30? Are we applying it to the projects?
For next year's report, if you could figure out any way to answer some of these questions. would be
Yeah,
great.
we definitely can, yeah, that information is readily
You can
available.
replace this, I mean, I don't see where this
Yeah.
tells us anything, except you've got a good calculator.
And we can bring that to you next month when the auditors are back to ask for approval of the AUP. We could have that chart
Right.
brought to you
Please do.
as a piece of information.
That'd be great.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
Well, I wasn't here the last meeting, I'm sorry, you guys had a good discussion. I had a question, and Ariana and Jose and I talked about this yesterday on the pre-conference call related to the meeting. The performance audit that was done, this report, and it was a good audit for Sandag and Italk, and that the programs run smoothly compared to other regional agencies and all that. And when you read this report, I mean, it talks about sort of all the cities and how they've done, which is great. But there's nothing in here that really emphasizes the paragraph that we could write. I mean, I pulled out the executive summary for the audit results, and Sandag and the transportation partners continue to employ a solid framework of practices, controls, activities management, well-run Transnet program. So I'm wondering, every 3 years this is done. In this instance, on this annual report, is there a way for us to make note of the performance audit? Because they spend a whole page on the audit, on the fiscal audit, there's a whole page of all these bullets. But yet, when it comes to the performance audit, there's one reference in it, and maybe here you just talked about the 70-30 here, it talks about the Sandag appropriately allocated, but wouldn't we want to hear about the results of the performance audit this year in this report? I mean, we could reference it, I guess, like we do on the annual audit, to go to the website and read the audit. Is there
Yeah, and we do reference on page 2 of the report, so the inside cover, where you list your ITAC activities for fiscal year 2016, the second bullet
Yeah.
does talk about continuing to review implementation of the recommendations from the triennial performance audit.
But in my mind, I mean,
But
again, I don't know if we, I don't want to make this too long here, but is there, I mean, you could add another paragraph and say, take some of the audit results out of the thing and insert it in this, but I just wanted to get your all feedback on that, because this is all about the cities, which is what we're supposed to do, but the audit also talked about the performance of Italk, the performance of Sandag.
Well, I can't recall, were there any noteworthy recommendations that came out of the performance audit that might speak to Brad's point?
So last year's annual report, what we did, we had a whole page dedicated to your triennial audit, and then we called out just one of the areas where Italk intends to keep a watchful eye on the CMGC alternative delivery.
So that was,
method.
was
So
that last year's annual report? I had that.
Yeah,
last
and that's,
year's,
and that's the
because
thing
that's
I'm
where you
interested
reported
in.
your performance, right. So we could maybe follow up
I
on
didn't know that
something.
last year if you had that, so.
So,
Was that from the audits?
yeah.
Was
Because
that from the
last
audit,
year
the
is when
prior
you
audit?
reported on your recommendations from the triennial.
Oh,
But we could maybe
that's it.
summarize something, provide a status about the implementation, you know, maybe.
oh, that's true, but
something.
that was 15, okay, well, maybe that answers my question then, I mean,
But we
I didn't
could
know.
add something if we
I
Well,
didn't know.
is it
some-
too early to have
I'm on
any comparable data on the
Um,
question that I?
Yeah, I mean, it would be very high level, I think, but, I mean, some progress has been made. We already provided a first
Oh, I didn't know.
update
So-
on
so
your.
this is-
Well, I know, and that's why I have questions on the next item, or I should say the final
And
one.
it goes, yeah.
Well, using Dick's framework of what the reader, kind of, when I look at bullet point 2, it says continue to review, you know, on this ITALK activities for the fiscal year. When it says continue to review implementation of the recommendations, it kind of jumps out to me, which was my question is, were there noteworthy recommendations that are worth mentioning here perhaps, just as a parenthetical, to give visibility to?
Well, that's good, and then I didn't realize that for some reason I thought the audit was, we're going, okay, this is this year.
So it sounds like you'd like to highlight maybe, you know, a couple of the recommendations that came out of the triennial and, you know, what has been done regarding those recommendations.
Yeah, it's sort of, again, that would answer the question of continuing to review implementation of what recommendations.
Yeah, that's good.
A couple of examples.
Again, if there were a couple that were noteworthy.
You want to, yeah.
Are you suggesting this be added to this report?
Well, I got this, as Stuart said, maybe a paragraph. I mean, we are referencing, I mean, it is interesting, the report doesn't really reference the performance audit, but the last year's did. So, but maybe when it comes to this last year, a couple items that were
Yeah, if there's sort of
implemented.
carryover.
Yeah,
Yeah, because you are still working on it, on reviewing
yeah.
the implementation, so even though you didn't conduct it in this year, which is why you didn't see it in this year, but.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah.
Apologize on that.
Well, we're trying to approve this thing today.
Well, we have
We have
another,
another month.
we do
We
have
have another month?
Yeah, can bring it back.
Not very much, I don't need very much, I think it references a little bit, but, and can you put down the website, like you do on the audit, on the annual, that section? To review the audit, performance audit, click on here.
Can I make one more comment? Okay, talking again about the graph from last year's, I was just, you know, giving a brief little talk here with my partner, and the thing that is a little bit unnerving about this graph is it's showing you the contractor's share of risk and control and the owner's share. But one of the questions I had is, the risk is one thing. I wanna know what the cost is, because you know, you might assume if you have more risk, you have more cost. Is that true? I don't assume anything when it comes to contracts. So that's what I wanted to track on an annual basis. When we're going through these different processes, whether it's the general contractor, the design build, or the design bid build, what are the costs, and are they rising? Are they lowered? And there's more than just cost, I know, with the project. Maybe the ones that cost more actually bring it in earlier, and there's a significant savings there to the public. But without the information, I'm guessing. So when I had suggested we track this, I really wanted to know, in the end, comparing all these, what's happened. And it's been a year, and maybe we don't even have enough information.
Is that the graph, is that the CMGC process?
Yeah, that's likely our next item we're gonna be talking about.
Exactly.
So that's good. Well, thank you. If we could add that, that'd be great.
Okay.
But Ariana, when we
Will
were
do.
talking yesterday, I didn't think about last year's report.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
okay.
Just in your overall schedule, now obviously you've gone through several iterations, you need to realize you're going to hit another iteration. When do you make it final, allow us to diddle with it anymore?
Well, we'll bring it back to your July meeting.
And then it's final, baby.
And then it'll be final, and maybe what I'll do is
At
I'll
some point
send
then we have
you,
to cut it off.
kind of a, maybe both of you, just the mock-up of, based on your comments today, so you can
Yeah,
say
or,
yay or
do you
nay.
send that to all of us or just?
Just to be compliant with,
Oh,
Brown Act,
yeah,
let's,
sure.
if we could keep it,
Yeah, sure.
that would be great. And then bring it back in July.
Great. Item 7. Steve, is that for you? Welcome. Progress report on Transnet Major Corridor projects. I know this is always an interesting subject for all of us.
Good morning. Let me start by highlighting the recent scheduled accomplishments. The San Elijo Lagoon double track project along with the Chesterfield Drive crossing was advertised for construction in April. These two projects are part of the CMGC delivery package along with the I-5 2 HOV lanes, the Batiquitas Lagoon double track project, and the San Elijo Lagoon restoration project. Oceanside Station Pass-Through project began construction in March. The planned improvements include adding a third track and a new platform to facilitate improved operations. Moving on, segment 1 of the State Route 11 and Otay Mesa port of entry was opened to service in March also. Construction began on the South Bay BRT project in March. Once completed, the South Bay Rapid project will span a 21-mile route connecting Otay Mesa border crossing to downtown. And all the information, the detailed information on the schedules, as you know, are available in the Transnet dashboard. On the cost side of things, there was significant engineering on the Mid-Coast project, the I-5 North 2 HOV lanes, and the Elvira to Marina, the double tracking project, which is also part of the CMGC, along with the Mid-Coast that John's going to be talking about next. There was significant construction activity on the Mid-City Center Line, I-5 Genesee widening, 76 East, and the 805 North 2 HOV lane projects. And just like the schedule, that there's significant cost information also in the Transnet dashboard, which we update every month. Getting down to the cost trends, the average number of bidders on the Caltrans projects over $5 million for the first quarter of 2016, which ended in March 2016, is 5.5, and that is well above the 3.2 bidders that we experienced in the third quarter of 2006. The Caltrans 12-month construction index is up 15% from last year, representing an increase in the price of construction. The Caltrans index is a board statewide indicator, and we continue to show the transportation performance measures in the dashboard for the I-5, I-15, and the 52 corridors. That's a summary of the Transnet report.
Any comments? Always a good report. I did want to mention that Caltrans on the 805, I'm not sure if this is necessarily a Transnet, I mean it is, but the 805 Mira Mesa direct access ramp, southbound, south side of Mira Mesa, or Mira Mesa is going to be, there's a ribbon cutting on next Thursday, I think, and maybe we could see if we could get the invitation to the committee. It's going to affect traffic right through the Balcon area and that area, so I thought that's a good thing for us to go see if we can. Good ribbon cutting to go to.
add to Asito's report, the CTC is scheduled to allocate 99 million in STIP funds for the I-5 North Coast Corridor project. And just STIP funds are becoming harder and harder to come by. You know, these are state dollars that used to be quite plentiful back, say, 15, 20 years ago, and over time, the amount of STIP funds has just gone down. So just getting an allocation as large as 99 million for this project is a significant regional success.
How do we do it?
Well, we put most of our money on the I-5. It's a really good project in the sense that it's not just a highway project or just a rail project. It's a multimodal project. It's actually going to be building both the San Alejo Lagoon highway project or reconstructing, as well as the rail project, but it's also coordinating lagoon enhancements and bikeway enhancements. So it's, from the Commission's standpoint, it's the best of all worlds coming in under a single project.
Plus, we have environmental approval, right?
We have environmental approval, yes.
So.
And this is in the coastal corridor, so it's an even greater accomplishment.
That's great.
Using that as an example, as we talk about that project, what percentage of the funds, what percentage of the ultimate estimate of that cost of that project has already been funded? Does you have funds in hand, or are we fighting this battle to get funding incrementally?
Well, for this particular project, as the projects move forward to construction, the CTC requires that all funds be available at the time that they allocate the funds. Is that what you're asking about?
All funds.
Well, no, remember, you can't, okay, it's different. The allocation, explain, because it's hard to understand if you haven't been with Caltrans.
The CTC will not allocate state funds for a project that has not identified all of the funds that it will be paying for that project.
What do you mean by identifying? Is identifying they've been committed, or identified as a wish list?
No, identifying means that they have been approved by the funding agency. So in this case, we have state funds, which would come from the CTC. There are regional funds coming from SANDAG, and so SANDAG approved those funds by programming them in the RTIP. And then there's federal funds, which are also required to be programmed in the RTIP.
So they're approved, if we like your project, we're
Yes.
writing it into our master
Yes.
plan. Is the funding of my master plan contingent upon annual appropriations? So if for some reason the legislature zeroes out that year, well, it's in everybody's plan and everything, there's no cash.
Right. So in this particular case, there are some future federal funds that would be subject to future appropriations. So you're right, there is some risk in that. But
The state and SANDAG, in theory, I guess if the sales tax went to zero, there wouldn't be any funds available. But I mean, there's a range of variation around your estimate. There's some risk in the ability to get the funding to program. As distinct from someone saying, I got to have all my cash in hand before I can start the project.
Right.
That's not our.
no, it's not.
Remind me, how many years is the STIP look ahead these days, and in what year is this 99 is this 99 million?
The 99 million are programmed for this fiscal year 16. The 2016 STIP was just adopted by the CTC, and it's a 5-year program, so it starts in FY17 to FY21.
So it puts all 99 in this first
In this
fiscal year, and then 0, 0, 0, 0.
Well, there's additional funds for the I-5 corridor and the 2016 STIP. Those, the CTC has pushed those out to fiscal year 21.
And the reason is, why? Explain that, why we're lucky enough to get 99 million in the first year.
Actually, this is, it's not the first year of the next STIP. This is, the 2016 STIP begins in fiscal year 2017, so it begins July 1st. The 99 million were dollars that were programmed as part of the 2014 STIP for this fiscal year, and so we work with the Commission to make sure that those dollars would be available for allocation this fiscal year.
I'm not sure who to direct this to, but I'm curious if for these projects, if you guys forecast anticipated construction-related delays, and in the planning of projects, if there's much flexibility in terms of delay mitigation and are there instances where, well, we know that there'll be an average of a 30-minute delay if we spend dollars X on, the bare bones of what we need to do versus we could cut that delay down to an average of 15 minutes if we spend more money doing more mitigation-related work. Is that, you understand what I'm asking? Or not?
I'm not quite following your.
You mean traffic delay?
Yeah, traffic delays, yeah. As somebody who travels north on I-5 and is anticipating what this is gonna be like.
Well, I think, speaking of the I-5, I think what we're trying to do is get that project done as quickly as we possibly can with the funding. It's not just Transnet funds
Right. No, I
that we
understand.
pay for it. So
Well, that's what I'm particularly interested in is if, for example, and I don't know, if there are choices that if you spend more, you can actually do more in terms of delay mitigation or not. Maybe there just aren't really choices. But if there are choices, if there are guidelines that you can't spend, more than, a minimum amount on delay mitigation.
Well, the rules on spending the funds, if I'm understanding your question, is you can advance some of these funds within certain rules. We have federal rules, we have state rules, we have our own sandbag rules. And within all of these rules, we try to advance as much as we can, such that we're still, prudently managing the Transnet program, not running afoul of any of the state or federal regulations, but still trying to advance as much of these resources to try to complete these projects.
I'm not asking a question. Well, let me phrase it this way. So, for example, in the case of replacing the bridge or the temporary bridge, you could have a temporary bridge that has one lane, or arguably, if you spend more, you could have a temporary bridge that has 2 lanes. And I'm curious as to if there actually is a real choice to spend more money to do
A
greater
construction
mitigation.
guru.
Yeah.
How those
Construction.
trade-off decisions
You're a
are made.
construction
Yeah,
guru here.
but does that make more sense in terms?
When you're working on an interstate freeway or even on a rail line like the coaster or the trolley, there are less opportunities to do that. One of the things on I-5 that we have discussed is when we go over some of the existing bridges, rather than build them out, can we restripe the bridge and make it much, just, in other words, fit that extra lane in the existing bridge footprint? So that would save time and money, and that's an option that we have looked at in the past. The problem with exercising that option is once you restripe the freeway and you have cars and trucks on the entire width, when you do have the money to come back and put it in as full standard, especially being an interstate freeway, it really is good to have that as full standard. It's very, very difficult to build at that point. And also a problem with taking that option on the I-5 project is under existing state legislation called the Kehoe Bill, we've agreed to touch the lagoon once, which means when we go in and we mess with that lagoon for the rail project, we have to do the highway project at the same time. When we go in for the highway project, we have to do the rail project at the same time. So that's another constraint. But we have absolutely looked at things like that. Are there opportunities to reduce its standard temporarily to match the funds that we have and still produce the same end product? I-5, how it will most likely end up is if we don't have enough money to go all the way to Route 78, it's very much can be like Gary tells us, an accordion project, where we can go as far north as we have money to go.
And to add to Jim's question, now that I understand your question a little bit better, when we have construction on some of these really congested corridors, we also focused on transportation demand management. So there are strategies where, there's the same number of people trying to travel on that corridor, but if we can get some of those people to travel in a van, in an 8-passenger van, now you've got, instead of 8 cars, you've got 1 van. So we try to coordinate the construction efforts with transportation demand management efforts to try to reduce the demand during the construction period.
And our van pool program is incredible. I forget how many vans we have now, but it's an astounding number.
Yes, we have, is it 7,000?
7,000?
Really?
Holy moly.
Are they visibly marked, with identifying
Yes.
logo?
I think so, yeah.
What does it say? I don't know whether I've ever seen one.
Probably something like brought to you by Sanday.
No, doesn't it say commuter van or something like
Van
that?
pool.
Seriously, I mean,
I think they say Vanpool, Sandag, Vanpool.
Yeah, powered
I
by
was in Sandag Vanpool number 1.
Isn't it powered by Sandag?
Caltrans back then, it was commuter computer.
That's right, that's right.
And something else we also do is, in addition to the demand management, we try to manage and do operational improvements right from day one. And so just adding an auxiliary link which connects two interchanges, adds some width for a mile or two, tremendous short-term impacts, or benefits rather, impacts in the benefit side. And we've done that in Chula Vista on 805. Had just tremendous for a fairly small investment compared to, an operational or a widening project in the entire freeway.
Jim, I have a question for you. What's the difference in cost for, pick a distance. If the distance is going across the bridge versus being on ground, what's the cost of the bridge versus the ground cost?
Probably hundreds of times more. That would be my engineering guess.
No, I know it's, but I just didn't know what the range was. Okay.
Yeah, because you're not only building a bridge, but some of our bridges are over land, but for the most part, on I-5 they're over lagoons. And so the limitations on when you can work and how you can work without impacting the lagoon, especially in the coastal zone, just adds tremendously to the cost of the projects.
Thank you.
I need to correct, it's not 7,000, it's 700. 720 van
Oh,
pools.
shoot.
I'm just looking at the report, sorry. Just looking at the report from last time, 720 van pools with approximately 5,550 participants countywide.
and what does Sandag subsidize in the van? I was saying they use one.
Right, so the participants pay for a portion, but we subsidize a portion of the cost. We use federal funds for that.
And the users supply the driver?
We provide the driver.
Right, but the participants also pay, and some employers actually pay for the participants' cost.
How well understood is that program through the business community around here? Do we have enough employees that work in it?
Right, we have our TDM program that does significant outreach to employers to let them know about the opportunities.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if the public education relating to whether it's the vans or even just what anticipated delays themselves are expected to be, are those done as part of the costs of the budget, as part of the cost of the individual projects? Or is that kind of a more general kind of public, communications budget type item? Do you know that?
Yeah, the general regional TDM, like Jose was talking about, is part of our TDM program. So the van pools, we advertise the outreach is really to the employers, and the employers outreach to their employees. Now, whenever you have a construction project that's going to impact traffic, then that's funded as part of the construction project, and that is, we'll put on extra freeway service patrol, FSP, where the tow trucks will pull you off the road quicker, because if there's no shoulder, or if the shoulder's narrower, then the impact of somebody breaking down is greater. So we'll have increased patrols by the tow trucks to give you a free tow or a free gallon of gas. And we do also the community outreach in the UTC area, where we're working on Genesee right now. And
Yeah, I just saw one of those, which kind of prompted the question, because it was the first time that maybe because I live in the area, it's the first time I paid attention, but it just struck me that, doing as much of that as you can probably really helps with, or at least prepare people.
Absolutely. There's so much construction that will be going on over the next few years at the UTC area that we actually have a special campaign of outreach. It's called Shift, and it's outreach to let everybody know what everybody is doing on both the public side and the private side, because UCSD is expanding. There's a lot of private development going on in addition to the Sandag Transportation Project.
Great, thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you, and Lisa, thank you very much. Speaking of UTC, John, the I-5 project is, of course, going on, but of course the Mid-Coast Corridor project, transit project, is a different one. So it'll be great to get an update from you. And we have a PowerPoint in front of you as well.
All right.
Welcome.
Laura, is there some way we can lower this light in front? Put me in the dark, maybe. All right. Good morning. I'm John Haggerty. I'm the corridor director for the Mid-Coast Corridor Project. And so I wanted to give you an update on where we are on the project. And we've made quite a bit of progress on the project. We're really getting poised to go into full construction on it. So just a quick overview of the project itself. The Mid-Coast Corridor starts down here in Old Town and follows I-5 up to the UTC area. This kind of hash mark where it's darker blue, that area is aerial structure. So for the about 11 miles of the corridor, about 4.3 miles of it are actually on an aerial guideway, a viaduct. It's 11 miles, so it starts at Old Town and goes up to UTC. There are no at-grade crossings on this, so it's completely grade separated. It's a $2.17 billion project. About half of that, about 48% of it, is going to be federally funded through the full funding grant agreement with the FTA. We just negotiated a guaranteed maximum price for the major part of the construction at $927.5 million with a group called MCTC. It's our construction manager, general contractor. I'll get into that a little bit more in the presentation. There's going to be 9 stations. 5 of those are going to have parking.
Apologize for interrupting, but
yeah,
relative to the conversation we just had a minute ago, can you use your specific project as an example? You just mentioned how large this project is. It's huge. How much of that funding is in hand, or you're about to start? Do you start without knowing that you're going to have all the money to complete on schedule?
So I'll look for Jose on a little bit of backup on this. But basically, we've started the project a number of years ago in the environmental process and final design. The federal government has approved us to be reimbursed for all of 50% of the more or less 48% for all of the expenditures we have to date, with the anticipation of getting a full funding grant agreement.
Right. So the project is going to be funded essentially with 2 different sources: local Transnet funds and federal what's called full funding grant agreement funds. These are federal funds from the FTA New Starts program.
No state money in this one at all.
There's no state funds. We are on schedule to execute what's called the FFGA in August. So once we have that money, it'll be a big check, according to Jim, a big check like this. At that point, we'll have their share of the funds. The region does
the entire project.
Essentially, it's a commitment from the federal government to fund over $1 billion in project costs. But to get to your previous question, this is subject to annual appropriations.
Not line item appropriation, it's appropriation for a bucket of which you're one component of many.
Right. But it is a commitment from the federal government, and to date, the federal government has,
So our method of operation is you will launch, you will sign a construction contract, you'll dig dirt, and hoping that every year you get an appropriation and the money will flow to keep your project going.
Right. We have the FFGA is a contract with the federal government, so they will deliver the funds. Right now, they've told us to expect it no more than $100 million a year. So that's almost 10 years worth of time frame for them to pay us back. It is a contract, so they are under the obligation to provide that. Again, the Congress could extend that cash flow out.
As long as he interrupted with money.
No, I feel free to interact with me anytime.
Okay, my
I'm happy
question
to do
is
that.
this: is it important to this project that the next Transnet ordinance is passed because of money flow, or you can do it without it?
no.
I'm going to rely
It's
on
not.
Jose for that.
No,
A little disingenuous.
the financial plan for the Midcoast project does not rely on the new sales tax program.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, the project also includes, like I said, we've got 9 stations. 5 of those will have parking. We're going to buy 36 new light rail vehicles. If you've been out on the line and you've seen the new low floor vehicles that we now have on the entire system right now, it's been a tremendous improvement. Those will be the vehicles we're buying for this alignment. It's going to be operated as the Blue Line, so it's going to be a 1-seat ride from San Ysidro to UTC if you choose to stay on that line. And we're estimating about 21,000 daily boardings on this segment. Just kind of recap some of the major milestones where we've been on the project. Back in November of 2014, the environmental document was approved, both the CEQA and NEPA. In last April, we got what's called engineering, entry to engineering from the FTA. At that point, they then allowed us to do things like buy right-of-way, start utility relocation, and go into final design. So for about a year now, we've been in that process. We are actively acquiring right-of-way. We could also do advanced utility relocation, so we are relocating both wet and dry utilities. Then just last month, very shortly ago, the board awarded the construction contract to our construction manager general contractor. Like I said, I'll get into that a little later, for the $927.5 million. Full funding grant agreement, we are looking for that in August. Once we get the full funding grant agreement, we can't execute that GMP contract. We've negotiated it. We're in the process of getting all of the documentation together to have a complete project. When the FTA approves that project, what we'd like to do is the next day execute the contract and then issue an NTP to the contractor to go out to construction. So real construction on the light rail part of the project we expect to happen late this summer and in the fall. That will go on for about 5 years of construction. We expect that the construction will finish up sometime in spring of 2021. And then there'll be a time when we actually, MTS goes out and does all of their systems testing and startup, and it basically breaks in the system. And then by September of 2021, we're looking for revenue operations. Just to kind of paint the picture, in terms of what we're doing in the project corridor, this is a project corridor with a lot going on. So we have the Mid-Coast Trolley Project. The asterisks up there indicate projects that are Transnet funded. So we are also doing the double tracking. It's the Los Angeles San Diego River Bridge. So there's a single track bridge right now over the San Diego River for the coaster BNSF and Amtrak. There was already a Transnet project to double track that. We're bringing that into the same program so that we're coordinating Mid-Coast, which is being built side by side with that work. And then there's also the Elvira to Marina double track project. Do I have the right one? No. Sorry, it's not going forward.
That's 3, left is forward.
No, that's not bad. I'm stuck. I need to go one more. There you go. I pushed the button and didn't get it. Okay. All right. Then the Elvira to Marina double track project is also in that rail corridor, and it basically goes from up where the alignment starts. The coaster project comes down the coaster line comes down Rose Canyon, and then it turns south from about that location around SR 52 all the way to just over Balboa Avenue. We're going to double track that segment of the line too. Since we're building these projects side by side and a number of the bridges are basically very close together, we determined early on that if we didn't do all of these projects together, more or less as one construction project, although it's 3 separate construction projects, we would really, Sandag in the future would have a very difficult time double tracking in this area because there'd just be no real room for doing any construction. Then since then, we have a lot of work going on up at the university. We're building the Gilman Drive. We're building the Mid-Coast project through the university. The university has for years wanted to build a bridge over I-5 at Gilman to add a second link across I-5 for their campus. Right now, they only have Boyd Drive. So they came to us and said, we've designed this bridge, but because you're doing all of this bridge work and the Mid-Coast goes right over a part of that work, would you be willing to take on this work as part of your construction management general contractor work? And so we've got an agreement with them that's going to the board in June to fund that and move that forward. We've also moved forward some of the work on a Transnet program, which was going to be the I-5 North Coast Corridor Voight Drive direct access ramp. So at this point, we're going to rebuild the bridge and rebuild Voight Drive to 4-lane configuration so that people can get off the DAR in the future at Voight and go to Genesee to the east to access UTC. So we moved that ahead in the transit program so that we could do all of this work on the campus simultaneously with one contractor. The university and the UTC area residents weren't too thrilled with the idea of this being strung out over a number of years, so we're coordinating all that work together. And then Sandag has another project in Rose Creek to do a bike path. It just was a natural, it shares, again, kind of the same corridor, same area of construction along Santa Fe Drive and under SR 52. So all of that's going together underneath our construction manager, general contractor. Also going on out there is the UTC Transit Center. That's a Sandag project that's Transnet funded, but it's actually being built by Westfield. It's a transit center. It takes the bus transit center that's up at Westfield by Macy's, I'm sorry, and moves it down onto Genesee Avenue and with a bus island, and will improve access through there. The city is doing a pure water program. We're coordinating with them for their pure water program. Navy is doing a fuel line expansion. These are not contracts we're doing, but we're coordinating with them. I didn't list it here, but the VA Medical Center is in the midst of a major expansion. We have a station at VA Medical Center, so we're having to coordinate with them. And then the university is always building something. So we've got stuff that we're having to coordinate back and forth. Yes?
Where's Elvira?
Elvira is just south of SR 52. It's what we call a control point. So it's a place where the trains switch from one track to the other. It's just there's a bunch of old names along the old railroad corridor. We call CP Rose, CP Elvira control points. They were named by the BNSF way back when.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned the Navy fuel line. Is that the one that runs close to Rosecrans?
I'm not sure where this Navy fuel line runs. We hit it at Tecolote and then near Friars Road. Okay. And there's also a Navy fuel line that we're avoiding up on Genesee area. So yeah, they've got quite a few facilities in the area.
You have a monumental challenge ahead.
Yes, we have, and we have a good group managing it. We've moved pretty forward on it.
And you have all unique contracts, so there's going to be impact between those contracts that are going to get negotiated out as well.
Which I think brings us to the next slide of why we're doing a construction manager general contractor process. So I'm just going to explain a little bit. The construction manager general contractor, that involves selecting a contractor during the design phase of the project, and that's based on qualifications and price. Then we have the contractor on board, and we have had the contractor on board during the design phase. I was really hesitant about trying to do this project as a series of low bid contracts and then Sandag owning the interface between all of those contractors. So when design is sufficiently complete, and it doesn't have to be 100% complete, we can now ask for a price from the contractor. The contractor gives us a guaranteed maximum price that we negotiate for that work. The contractor would then build the project at that negotiated guaranteed maximum price. Except for, of course, it's never quite that easy. If there are any owner requested changes out of scope, then that would be a change order to the contract. There's also the possibility of unanticipated circumstances. A good example is always on these major projects of unknown geotechnical conditions in the ground or man-made buried objects. And because we're going through so many jurisdictions, there's always the possibility that we might be delayed in an area where we told the contractor we would deliver him some ability to construct, whether it's in a railroad corridor or on campus. We've been working with those entities, and we have most of their restrictions put into the contract now, and we're negotiated in the GMP, but it's still a pretty volatile corridor in terms of some of that stuff.
What does that process comprehend or anticipate if you are unable to successfully negotiate a max price?
Then we take all of that intellectual property that we got from them and bid it out.
You walk away and
we walk away, and that's
retain
the
what you got.
contract. So
That's
essentially, we did have to pay for those pre-construction services, but we've gotten a tremendous amount of input from them in terms of constructability, and they really understand and have coordinated with the railroads in the area. So the way we're gonna do this, the graphic illustrates the way we've set this up. We've already have basically a general construction services agreement that's in place. It has all the contract boilerplate in it for a construction contract. And then we've been letting out the actual construction contracts in what we call supplements. So there's a specific supplement for each of these listed. We had a supplement that was approved by the board for wet utilities. We have a supplement that's been approved by the board for the construction of that double-track San Diego River Bridge. We are currently, we just completed negotiations for the Gilman Drive Bridge. The university was a part of our negotiating team and was involved in that. We just went to the board on the orange up there to award the GMP for the Midcoast project. So the three remaining right now that we still are negotiating are the Elvira to Marina double track project, the Voight Drive Bridge, and then the Rose Creek Bikeway. Yes, sir.
You said that you are sharing in the risk for hauling dirt off the project.
Yeah.
How are you doing that? You don't know the destination yet, or what?
And that's a good example of how the GMP worked.
Yeah, I like the idea.
Yeah, what happened is in the negotiation, the contractor is a contractor that is Stacy Whitback, Herzog, and Skanska. They do work in the area, but the consortium that's mostly doing this rail work is not a local group. And they looked around, and when they were negotiating the price for us, they kind of came up with the highest, what we thought was a very high price to haul dirt. This is an export job, haul dirt off the project. And we said, we don't believe that. We think we can control that risk a lot better than you can. So what we did is we negotiated a price that we thought was a fair price to haul that off. And in the negotiation, we said, okay, if the price to haul that off, then we were counting on the actual cost to take the dirt somewhere, dispose of it, whether it was putting it into a fill or just stockpiling it. We would take the upside if it cost more than a certain amount that we put into the GMP, and if that was lower, we were going to get the benefit.
Is that one way you got them to come down from 981 to 927?
Yeah, and they started higher than that. But yes, that was one of the ways we got them down, is there's a lot of negotiations. And when we get into the GMP, in fact, I'm just going to jump to the next slide, because I think it's a little more instructive about how we do this. So what we would do is we give them a set of what we call GMP plans and specs. So when we've worked, they've been on the design team, so they now know that they can take that plan set and put a price to it that they can give us a guaranteed maximum price. It's normally beyond 65, but it certainly doesn't need to be at 100% level. Then what we do is we bring on an independent cost estimator on our team, somebody who's actually a contractor who builds a price exactly the same way a contractor would. And so we brought in a firm called Stanton, and they're basically a bunch of ex-contractors who do this kind of consulting. And so they put together an independent cost estimate built up on the same platform, the same estimating platform the contractors use, but completely separate. But one of the first things we do is reconcile quantities. So we take the engineer's estimate, the quantities that the contractors come up and our ICE to come up with. We put them in a room and they agree on what the quantities are. And then the next step is they all go back into their separate corners and develop their cost estimate for the direct cost, the indirect cost. They start looking at what the risks are on the project. Then they start developing their risk matrices or the risk cost for the project. If we do a low bid, there's a risk cost built into it. The thing is, we just don't know what that risk is. In this process, we're telling the contractor, strip that direct and indirect down to what we can see, and then we're going to talk about what the risks are on the project and how much you're going to put into it. We also have a fee built into that. That's how we got the price of the GMP. So all of the contractors essentially bid a fee, and so that was part of the selection process.
Yeah, how many people bid it? How many?
We had, I believe we had 5 teams come in.
5 proposed it.
And I think out of that there were 3 really highly competitive teams. It was a great process.
Are any from San Diego, or are they all out of the city?
Well, it's a good question because Skanska, Herzog, and not so much Stacy Whitback work in San Diego quite a bit on other projects. So none of the teams were pure San Diego teams, but most of them had one of the major contractors on. Another one would be Flatiron was part of one of the teams. And so those kind of teams we saw come in.
And Herzog has done a ton in San Diego years and years ago on the trolley, one of the original, they
Yes.
built one of the original trolley barns, so I mean, I think the experience there is really good.
If there are, I don't know of any local San Diego headquarters contractors, Brad, you might know, that could handle a project like this. The hazards of the world and the dailies and the Regis that used to do a lot of local work.
They're too small.
Either they're not around anymore or they are way too small to handle something like this.
Did they bid a fixed dollar bid, or did they bid a percentage to be applied to whatever your negotiated
They
cost?
did a fixed, for the fee was a fixed percent of the total.
Percentage.
Yeah, percent,
What was their fee?
5%.
5% fee.
Yes.
When you were talking about the second little green box, quantities reconciled, was it basically engineers sitting down together and going, well, this is how I calculated what the cut and the fill or the whatever is, or who argued that? I can't imagine.
It was a lot of different groups, because you had your systems group, your earthwork people, your track work people, but it was the estimators, the direct estimators from MCTC and our independent cost estimator, and then our engineers came in with their estimates. So I mean, it was really poring over plans and agreeing on exactly what the quantities were. At the end of the day, in this GMP price, we are going to turn all of quantities essentially into fixed amounts. So if the contractor builds 110 feet of pipe, and it was 100 feet, that's in the GMP. We're not paying any difference. If he builds 90 feet, he gets the benefit of that. The only difference is if we're building 100 feet of pipe, but we come by and say, oh, by the way, over there we need another 100 feet of pipe, then that's a change order.
Can I ask another question?
Sure, go ahead.
Are you putting Jim in charge of change orders, or you're not?
No,
Okay, that was good.
we're not putting Jim in
Well,
charge.
the interesting thing about this change order process is, you know, when you do a low bid, your resident engineer out in the field is simply reading the contract. And you're interpreting exactly what the contract says. You have arguments about whether you owe them another 20 feet or whether there's more or less. Here, because we negotiated it, the people who negotiated the contract with us have to be a part of reviewing those change orders, because the contractor, we paid him, in addition to the fee, we paid him a risk amount. And that risk amount was to say, okay, we've negotiated this price, you've done it on plans that were complete. Part of that risk is you know there's going to be changes to the plans, you're going to pay for that. Part of it is some of the risk we've sold them, like the cost of the export of the dirt. Another big thing we've sold them is the SWIP on this project. They have to do everything they need to maintain the stormwater pollution, and they can't come back to us for anything. That was, but we paid a little much more for that. We negotiated other things down, we paid a little bit more for that because we wanted us not to have that issue. So in that risk, they have some of those costs, you know, those costs are included.
Caroline, if I could just give you a serious answer. The change order process is something John and I were just discussing a couple of days ago. Throughout this whole development of this whole construction manager general contractor CMGC, we've always been trying to stay ahead to try to figure out what's the process in place to make sure everything is still under control, because we've never done this before. And change orders are one of those. We expect substantially fewer change orders, but how long, like for example, how long do we keep the estimating team who negotiated, or the negotiating team who negotiated what's in that guaranteed maximum price, how long do we keep them around? That's one of the things we were just discussing. Because if the contractor comes in and says, well, this is a change, we need to go to those folks who negotiated that says, is this truly a change? Or was that already negotiated? Look, there's going to be no-brainers that are just really easy to deal with, but there's going to be a lot of subtleties that the contractor may come back and say, no, this is a change in scope. That was not included in our GMP. And so we're trying to figure that out and what is the role. But there should be way fewer change orders than what you would normally see on a low bid job.
Well, I'm impressed that your great brain for change order problems is working on it now, because I was thinking along those lines.
And then so the next, sorry, it's not a question. Yeah, sure.
Your article also says that you're sharing in the risk by paying separately for the laydown facilities.
Yes.
With a job this size geographically, you're gonna have a lot of laydown facilities, I would think.
Right.
And are you gonna have any trouble, and that's our risk, if we can't find something.
Right.
Sandag will have to pay for any delays or what have you. Any problems at all in finding,
Right.
getting your laydown facilities
And
lined up?
we took on a lot of that risk because they were pricing that risk way over what we thought the price of the risk was gonna be. We were actually going to acquire some property that, in our right of way, that we think we can use for laydown and provide them extra areas. We knew that there was some work in, there's some areas coming out of the 805, Skanska in fact has a laydown that they've been using on 805. So we've been looking at a lot of alternatives. And we had some, on our negotiating team, we have some people who've done a lot of construction contracting in the area, and they've helped us identify a number of sites. Same for the just disposal of the dirt. We're looking at taking, a bunch of that down to SR11. We also know that they can get rid of it probably out on the old power plant location in Chula Vista. And so I think where we knew we had better local knowledge and better information, we weren't gonna pay them that higher price because it's ultimately then at a lump sum for them. So we thought, no, we can take a risk here. We put in about $10 million of risk, and we think we're gonna cover that for less getting the office of laydown right now based on where we are.
Thank you.
So the negotiation, one thing I want to leave you with though is the negotiations, what happens on this is all of those technical staff on our side on the negotiating team and all their technical staff, we negotiate somewhere in here, and there's a difference between the two. And their estimators aren't gonna budge, and our guys aren't gonna budge. So the final negotiation really went up to the executive level at their joint venture team and all the way up to Gary Gallegos. He was involved in the final negotiation. And so it was a very detailed negotiation, but at the end of the day, you have to make up that difference by really getting the managers in the room and saying, look, this is all we can afford, or this is all we're willing to pay for something, and are you willing to do it at that amount? And so we did have that kind of discussion go on.
One last kind of quick question.
Oh, sure.
A 5% fee for a job this size seems kind of large to me, but you say you had 3 good competitors. Were they all around 5% or higher?
Yeah, in fact, they all came in at the same number for the cost.
Illusion?
No, we actually wanted, we had a lot of discussion about where we set that fee level. And what we said is that we were gonna have, I think that was our, trying to remember, was that our maximum or minimum fee, but we set a fee level in there because we didn't want that to become too much of a
So you basically
distraction.
gave some parameters.
Yeah, we set parameters for them because we felt that was gonna be a real issue on how they could manipulate that in the RFP process. And we have to have price as an alternative. It can't be pure qualification because the FTA doesn't allow that. So when you're doing a GMP selection for other federal requirements, you have to have prices in the factor. We weren't, they had no way to bid this. I mean, they had very rudimentary documents at the time, so they couldn't really provide
Understand,
price. Yeah.
which is why you go GMP.
Yeah. So we're preparing to execute the contract. We'll do the NTP, and then we'll go out to construction. So is there any other questions on the GMP process before we move on? Okay. Then we know that there was the Italk Audit. We've been responding to that on a regular basis. I just want to cover some of the things that were in there. Risk analysis, we have an ongoing risk process built into our program management. We have actually a risk consultant, and we, on a regular basis, go through the project risks. We determine what risks are highest, and then we clear risks as we pass them. We have a change control process. Obviously, on a project this large, there's the potential for changes, especially when we brought the CMGC on board with the designer, and they looked at retaining walls and how they built stuff, and they wanted some changes in the design. So we had to evaluate the cost and schedule impacts, the environmental impacts, because, what I found is they come in and say, this would be easy to do, except you have to mine that ESA over there, and you have to be worried about the flood control somewhere else. Lessons learned, we have some of the lessons that came out of this is we negotiated we kind of set out some small boats on calm waters first. We negotiated the utilities, the wet utilities contract first, you know, and then we started negotiating the San Diego River Bridge, much smaller contracts. What we learned is that unless we had one negotiating team for all of the work we were doing, we were at a disadvantage because the contractor only had one. So we basically have a very consolidated core group that's negotiating all of the GMP prices we have. The only variance in there is when we did Gilman Drive Bridge, we brought UCSD into that negotiating process. We successfully did, before we got to Midcoast, we did, Midcoast was our third GMP. I think, and every time we ended up, we had the range where, kind of what you saw there, they normally came down about 2/3, and we maybe went up 1/3 from where we kind of finished the staff work. Communications has been really important. We schedule meetings by discipline and on specific topics, and we have a lot of email traffic on the project. I think it's always a challenge on a project this big, and inter-project communications has always been a difficult issue. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, just actually going back, you mentioned UCSD and the Gilman project as and their involvement in a number of instances. Are they also a financial partner, or?
Yes.
Okay.
They are, and we'll go to the board on the 24th, and before you execute a contract, and then they will provide financing for the project.
They're paying their whole share of the funds?
The way this was going to work is there's a SANDAG. It's a project for $15 million. The university is providing right-of-way through their campus and future widening of the freeway. And with that, we've agreed to contribute that amount. And also the fact that we're building the Boyd Drive Bridge. If we build Gilman first, we'll be able to tear down that bridge in one time and not build it in two halves. And so we added up all of what we thought were the savings to the agency by not having to pay for all these additional costs. And it came out to quite a bit more than that. So, but we said, you know, the contribution from SANDAG to the Gilman Drive Bridge is fixed at this amount, and they're paying for all the additional amount. Right now, we figured the total is going to be somewhere about $19.5 to $20 million complete. So they're paying the additional.
You're paying 15, they're paying 19 in a budget in kind.
They're paying, no, the total's 19. They're paying 4 point.
Plus their in kind consideration.
Yeah, and any costs that go over are all university costs. Yes.
Do you include any contingency in these GMP prices?
I do in my budget, but I don't have it in the contract. That's part of what they have to have in their risk. Again, you know, if you look at
You don't have anything identified as contingency that they can tap into with justification.
What they have is we negotiated a risk price for them, and that is their contingency. So they the part of the negotiation was doing all of this stuff, and then we negotiated the risk. And what we did is, going back to your question on fee, we said, wait a minute, you look at the fee and the risk we give you, and we know what a normal contractor should be making on a project this size, and we pushed it within that range. We weren't going to let him have a GMP risk that now made his total fee plus risk exceed what's a normal rate of return on this kind of
That
construction.
money will become his at the end of the job.
Yeah, it's a lump sum project.
John?
Yes.
My question is this: I noticed that you've already started condemnation, and I was curious because I wondered why you couldn't negotiate, or do you have enough plans that are definite with legal descriptions, because you said your plans are not definite, to actually go through condemnation?
Well, we're at 95% design now. When we started the GMP process, we're going to condemnation. We've been in the right-of-way process now, and we just have to get. We're only going to the board for resolutions of necessity based on trying to maintain our schedule. So we know that the time it takes to go through the court and the rest. So we've been
Proactive.
Well, we have a schedule about when we need to go in order to meet the dates that we need to do. Most of the time right now we are getting we're close on a lot of settlements. Some of them we've just filed the paperwork for the condemnation, but we're really close to settlement. So we're continuing to work with them, and we're close to settlement. And a number of them, we've got possession and use agreements while we work out some of the details. And all of that's allowed us to we really need enough right-of-way to get the contractor working on Genesee, and we pretty much secured, you're gonna widen one half and the other half, we're pretty much at a point where we think we're not gonna be in its way at all with right-of-way.
Last question.
Yes.
How much did he get for risk analysis? Was it percent? Was it millions of dollars?
I think where we ended up was about 6%. We had 5% fee and 6% was the risk amount that we negotiated in the contract.
So he got a total of 11% markup.
Yeah.
Someone know.
Then just part of that whole negotiation process is the schedule. I mean, obviously, we wanted to deliver it quickly and efficiently. We had a lot of back and forth on the schedule. Part of what we negotiated with them was production rates, and then the duration for construction. So this is a schedule, the GMP, it's 56 months of construction time in the project. You know, this just shows you the basic elements, the retaining walls, the viaduct, stations, track and systems work, and then test and startup. And then I've got a bunch of slides that I'd just like to run through, kind of showing you what we're going to get out of the project at the end of the day for some of our visual sims. So these are the at-grade stations. So Tecolote Road will have a station with parking lot. It'll be at grade. There's going to be a separation wall between the track and between the light rail tracks and the heavy rail tracks. It's a little bit of an intimidating environment if there wasn't a substantial barrier between those two. The next is Claremont Drive. It's just a little farther up, so Tecolote Road's along Marina Boulevard. You go up to Claremont Drive, there's going to be a station there. In that case, the station parking is on the opposite side. There used to be a shopping center that's been vacant for a while. We're going to procure that as parking, and so we're going to have parking, station parking there.
How much parking, when you say parking, how significant?
150 spaces at Claremont, of 260 at Tecolote, and I think it's 220 at Balboa.
Is that considered by you guys a lot, or were you man that lot, that's the best you could do?
Well, it's actually based on what we identified in the environmental impact report. So the environmental impact looked at the whole traffic in the area and the parking demand. And in those locations, we felt that there was going to be significant parking demand, and if we didn't provide parking, then we would have overflow into the neighborhoods. So we felt that at those stations, we needed to provide the parking, and that was part of the environmental process.
You had sufficient land to cover what you anticipate.
Right, yeah.
Give me another answer to this question. By way of comparison, the existing Marina station, do you know how many spaces are available in that?
I'm sorry.
Approximately? I'm trying to figure out.
Do you know?
It doesn't seem that many.
Marina.
No, Marina.
The Marina Linda Vista Station.
Oh, the existing one?
Yeah.
Oh, boy, since it's been redeveloped,
I know.
I don't know, because it shares it, but at grade it shares it with the shopping center.
Right.
And down below along with Friars.
I'm going to say maybe 100.
That's all? Okay.
And it's very close to the Old Town station. And one of the benefits of Midcoast is Midcoast actually relieves parking demand on Old Town.
Right.
Because a lot of people drive from the Claremont and Bay Park areas to Old Town to catch the trolley. Now they'll be able to catch them at these stations
Right,
here.
yeah. Tecolote is picking up a lot of people who would have gone to Old Town.
One other question.
Sure.
Once you're there, where can you get something to get north? To get maybe like the Del Mar area?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple locations, but the best location is at the UTC Transit Center. There's a bus interface there, and then there'll be a number of bus interfaces at the Balboa station. Right now, I'm not sure any of those Balboa buses would head north. You'd have to make another bus connection.
I have to go south to get to an NCTV type.
Yeah, and VA Medical Center has a lot of North County buses that come into that location as well. They're over near the entrance to the VA, so they're not directly.
It's just bus,
Yeah.
not.
There's no
coaster.
Yeah, there's no direct connection to the coaster. So that's Claremont Station. And then this is Balboa Avenue Station, where again, we have, parking. And so the three along Marina Boulevard have a significant amount of parking. I think that's a really good thing because there's a lot of students in that area who will probably be heading north from UC.
Hey, John, on the Balboa, are the design of all these stations done, or is there still community input on some of these, I thought, that was happening?
Well, we pretty much finished the community input. We had a number of open houses, got back. I'm a little bit disappointed at the feedback we got. Well, basically, we showed them what we thought would be good designs, went through it with the MTS Executive Committee, but the community basically was, if they really just didn't have a whole lot to say. They said, yeah, this is good, we like this, instead of having a whole lot of demands coming out of the community. They generally accepted what we had, and so.
And you were disappointed?
Well, I was expecting more, I was expecting a lot more participation on their part in terms of that. There were groups who didn't like the station, either the location or the fact that the station there.
Yeah.
They were relatively vocal, but the actual feedback on stations was all positive, but I thought fairly muted.
If at one of these like this location here, if there was a future spur to the beach or something, or some alternative to the beach, and it would look at parking again, and if it needed supplemented, it would be part of that project, not,
Right.
This project didn't look at that future potential project in terms of parking. That would be a new process.
Right, yeah, we only looked at this. I think one of the areas in Marina, we got a lot of feedback about, in this station, about access to PB because the freeway narrows that down. We had a lot of questions about access over Claremont Drive to Mission Bay, but we're not repairing the freeway, we're not changing the freeway overcrossing.
Jerome's, the folks at Jerome's and then the Evergreen,
The Armstrong Nursery.
Armstrong Nursery, is there a station, is that a station right in that area?
That is, that will be part of the station, we're relocating Armstrong to have the station parking. We took a small portion of Jerome's and the A1 storage for parking as well.
I know they testified,
Yeah.
some folks in Jerome's and all
Yeah,
that.
we're in the process of still negotiating with them on the property.
Okay, thank you.
And then this is the VA medical station. It's at grade, but it's got aerial on either side. Then just the stations on the aerial stations, we have a station in Nobel. There'll be a parking structure with that station. We're on the La Jolla Village Square site. It's a place we need to have a station in terms of ridership, but we also, in order not to reduce the number of parking that the commercial building has, we're building a parking structure. This is Pepper Canyon Station at UCSD. It's the station on the west side. And then this is a view of the plaza at Pepper Canyon. Essentially, most of this station hangs out over the canyon. And so just the north end has a plaza that connects to the university. The university are working on bike connections, EV cars, and some other things with it. And then this is the station at Boyd Drive, which is on the east side of the UC campus, right across from the Preuss School, next to Thornton Hospital, Scripps Hospital. This is what we'd look like down the center of Genesee on a structure. This is the Executive Drive Station. We're actually reconfiguring this a little. We're working with the Irvine Company. They had some suggestions to reduce the impact of them and their damages, and we thought actually improve the station layout. And so we're working with them on a redesign. And then this is the station at UTC.
John, quick question on that. That's interesting. The construction that's going on for the mall, right across there, is that parking? Is that parking? Is that right there that's being constructed?
This is going to be our structure. This block in
That
here
right there is
parking structure for the mall.
That's being built right now, isn't it?
Being built right now, and this is being built right now too. So they're moving the transit center, like I said, from up by Macy's down onto Genesee Avenue, and I think it's got 12 bus bays, and they'll be able to pull in and out off of Genesee, and then we'll have a direct connection from the station to that transit center.
So that's exactly where that's interesting.
Yeah.
So that's exactly.
Yeah, we coordinated that work. I think that's the end of my presentation. So.
Okay, John, my question was, who performed the independent cost estimate?
It's a firm called Stanton.
And why do you think that they came in so low compared to what the eventual price was?
I think what you're looking at is a lot of back and forth between the two. So Stanton's coming in and they've done an estimate. And I think it's that not, what I found in the experience is that I always know now that MCTC's initial cost is gonna be pretty high. They come in quite a bit over where our independent cost estimate is. Our independent cost estimator, a lot of these people are a little bit more remote. They're working out of various offices, especially because we have so many disciplines. So they're not on the job site quite as much. So when they actually get into those small rooms and start talking, MCTC, who's been out here for almost 18 months, says, wait a minute, you can't build it that way. Here's what's gonna happen. And then the independent cost estimator will actually either go out in the field or work with them and adjust their estimate based on what they find out in those conversations. And so it is an iterative process. The MCTC kind of has all the advantages up front. That's why we bring in somebody like the independent cost estimator. And I think we've got a tough bunch too. They don't really want to just roll over. We had a lot of arguments about production rates. MCTC tends to like to have something that looks like a lower production rate, even though we think they could have done better. So that's where we get in with the independent cost estimate and say, what's a realistic area for doing this? And so that explains some of the difference. I think they always start high. Our guys start with, I think, a very rough bottoms line, just off the documents kind of estimate.
But it's inherent in the process. One guy's got skin in the game, the other guy doesn't. So that counts for a big chunk of it.
Yeah. It's an iterative process, yes.
Could I invite your attention to page 4 of our handout?
Sure.
It's table 1, called construction supplements. I just want to make sure I understand the big picture here, if I may.
Okay.
As I understand it, we've already awarded, or Sandag's already awarded, the selection, pre-construction, all the way through supplement 2.
Correct. And then,
Right.
at the board, the board awarded supplement 4. So this is the May 27th. award.
Okay, so supplement 4 is, I understand, that's 927.5.
Yeah.
The board still has to award supplement 3, Gilman Drive,
Correct.
and they have to award 5, 6, and 7 in the future.
That's correct.
And if supplement 4 is 927.5, so what would be the final total number, estimated number of the entire contract, including all 7 supplements?
I think right now it's somewhere around 1.2 billion.
1.2 billion?
Yeah.
So in other words, this is,
Because Elvira and San Diego River are together about 100 million.
okay, so this is the biggest piece.
Oh, yeah, by far the biggest.
Supplement 4 is the biggest piece,
Yeah.
and you think it'll wind up about 1.2.
Yeah. And that might be a high estimate, but the 2 largest components are San Diego River Bridge and Elvira, which are about 100 million total. And then it's about 30 million for the Elvira, the Boyd Drive. The Creek is about 14, and like I said, 20 million is, it's actually our GMP is 15.3 million for the Gilman Drive.
Okay, and they're doing, this contractor's doing the wet utilities also.
They started the wet utilities, that's under construction.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Is there anything I can help you with?
That's a good summary. A lot of good questions, team.
Appreciate your questions too. Thank you.
Mariana, Jose, any, this attachment, that was number 8, is an information item, future meeting schedule, July 13th. I was just looking at the schedule, the draft, and Andre's gonna be with us, and Mark Davis, and Mark, and I guess Lisa, you're gonna be back on sort of the next.
I'll be back in after
Oh, September, okay. Well, okay, the procedures for fiscal year, I guess on the audit? Yeah. And then, we're gonna figure out the next plan of attack for the next audit, performance audit, right? So, and then we'll vote on chair and vice chair.
Maybe.
No.
There are times that we don't have a quorum. Now, at our next meeting, we have things to vote on, including our annual report. What do we do if more than half of us are out traveling or something?
We reschedule.
Do-
We
Do we have any other procedures that we have? It has happened that we've had to cancel meetings.
Yes.
Well, can we take a survey now? Does anybody know, are you gonna be traveling, John and
No,
Jim?
I expect I'll be here.
Okay, is
Yeah.
anybody else gonna be traveling? I'm gonna be here.
Okay.
Well, we should hear from, did Dick leave or?
Yeah, but we'll have enough. One,
Okay,
2, 3,
all right,
4, 5,
all
6.
right.
We'll have enough.
All right. Because our chair will have to give a report to the board, correct?
The 22nd of July.
And we'd like to have a final report to say this has been approved.
Yeah, oh yeah. hopefully we'll
Gentlemen and ladies.
do that. No,
Instead of saying, this is what we plan to approve at our next meeting. Thank you very much. That concludes my
With
comment.
that, any other comments? Thank you, everybody. Adjourned. Good. Thank you.
Interesting meeting.